electronics was kind of my thing when I was in high school, and it's what I went to study when I got out of high school was electronics engineering. But at that time it was a lot more about, it was the late 70s, early 80s, and electronics was a lot more about integrated circuits and transistors, everything solid state, and I didn't do a lot of work on tube amps at all back at that time, other than maintaining my own amps, especially once I went out on the road. So at that time I was more of a pedal builder. The first amp I did build was a solid state amp. I built it in high school as a school project for a friend of mine who wanted a custom built amplifier, and at that time I just couldn't source any of the parts to build a tube amp, and my electronics instructor in high school just thought it was really crazy and stupid that I wanted to build something with tubes in it. So I ended up building this solid state amplifier, and then basically building in some overdrive pedals and things. It was an overdrive monster. It sounded really good. I wish I still had the schematics and things. I might look at it and consider building it. But that was my initial start in electronics, and I was a lot more geared toward building guitar pedals and things like that. Back in the early 2000s, when I got really serious about getting into building amps, it was definitely to build tubes. I'll tell the story of that in greater detail at some other point. But I started out, and it was that I wanted to build tube amps. But I didn't, I had the background in the theory, I understood the electronics and things, but I didn't really know what works and doesn't work as far as tube amps. So the first thing I did was, around about 2000, I started buying old vintage Fenders, especially the ones that weren't too collectible at that time. People weren't buying a lot of Champs and a lot of the blackface Fender, the blackface basements. So I focused on those, and basically buying them either in non-working condition or needs work condition, and then refurbishing them and making them work. And that's basically how I sort of figured out what works in tube amps and what doesn't. I refurbished or rebuilt over 30 blackface bassmen and probably 15 or 20 Champs, and really learned how to modify them, really learned how to make them sound the way they should sound, and then how to make them sound better. At the height of all of that, I think I had 18 bassmen in here and 6 or 7 Champs. I would buy them, work on them, record with them, play through them, have them stick around for a few months, and then I would sell them off. I couldn't really afford to keep that many amps around, but I could certainly hang on to them for a bit and play with them and see how they worked. So that was my background, my entry into working on tube amps. And then, as I say, I started building the Jagsters and other amps around 2006. My most recent sort of design of my own is what I call the Pistolino, and we'll talk about that down the road as well. So that's a little bit of how I got into amp building.